Hey everyone, welcome to the TA Innovators online meetup. We will be discussing how to humanize your employer brand through storytelling. And we're really excited for you to be here today. Before we get started, I would love to see who's watching, and where you all are tuning in from. So as you can imagine, storytelling is huge for employer branding. The stories your company tells will communicate the company values in a way that highlights what makes that workplace attractive, especially during this digital age, and what it makes attractive to individuals that are sharing the same values. And as I mentioned, as we are in a digital workplace, it's even more important to communicate these values with your audience. So I see some of you have already figured out how things work. We have the chat tab, so of course, tell us where you're coming from, what you're excited to hear today. Some of you have left us some questions when you signed up. We will be going through some of those at the end of the webinar. But please ask your questions in real time so that we can get to them as well. And you can also upvote your favorites. We will have a poll running during the online webinar, so I will let you know when that's coming through. And yeah, and most importantly, I'd like to welcome our speakers. We have Emily from TheTruthWorks. She is the CEO and founder and also a strategic consultant. And we also have Bailey from OfferZen. She is the head of organizational design and performance. And I am the events manager here at Recruity. Some of you might have met me when we were hosting our live meetups at the Recruity headquarters in Amsterdam. If not, you might have seen me on another webinar. So I'm really excited to be here today and to have these two awesome ladies sharing their insights, knowledge, and wisdom. And before we get started, I'd like to tell you a little bit about Recruity. Recruity is a talent acquisition platform that is designed to help you automate your manual tasks, attract the best talent, and predict your next best hires. And without further ado, we're going to begin with Emily. So Emily, you can take it away. Bailey and I will go off stage.
Fabulous. Thank you so much, Daniela, and thank you for inviting me. I'm excited to see so many of you joining today. Some people I recognize, actually. So hopefully I can add something new if I've spoken to you before. Today's topic is all about storytelling, but I'm taking a slightly different angle on it, and we're going to be talking a little bit about using storytelling to influence your leadership and why it's so important. So let's get started. I also want to say I'm going to try and get through this quite quickly because I've seen so many of you have sent in some questions, and Bailey and I both agreed we'd really like to get to the questions to talk about the things that matter most to you. So see this as a bit of an introduction to some of my thinking on the topic. So we're going to talk about leadership, storytelling, and why it matters for your employer brand. First, a little bit about me, and I'm going to start, I guess, by telling you a story. So my name is Emily Firth. I'm a strategic employer brand consultant. I'm also the founder and CEO of a consultancy called TheTruthworks, which is a collective of individuals that I've worked with in the past, both in EB and my branding career, who I pull in to help on larger projects and initiatives where more than strategy is required. And what we do at TheTruthWorks is really about helping companies attract and engage talent authentically. It's all in the name. I really believe that when thinking and talking about your employer brand, it is the truth that makes the biggest difference.
Hey, sorry about that. I think we're just experiencing a small technical difficulty. I'm sure Emily will be back in just a second to continue her presentation. Hey everyone, so as we're waiting for Emily to get back on stage, it would be great for you all to introduce yourselves to everyone. Emily just messaged me that she's just having a small technical difficulty, but we will be getting started again shortly. Oh, hey Andrea. It's nice to, I'm glad you're tuning in on this event. Sophie as well. We have Jennifer from Switzerland, Tatiana from Costa Rica, Camille. Okay, wow. We have quite an international crowd. It's great that you guys are all getting familiar with each other. Saudi Arabia, we got Cape Town in the house. Oh, nice. All right, great. Oh, nice, from Nicaragua. That's awesome. Oh, from Romania? Wow, let's see how many different nationalities we can get while we wait for Emily to tune back in. We've got Berlin, another one from Amsterdam. Oh, Prague. Okay, we really do have quite an international crowd. This is great. Madrid as well. Oh, hey,
I'm so sorry to have lost you. I don't know what happened. My laptop completely gave up, and so I've switched.
No worries.
Hopefully
all right.
Well,
okay. Well, everyone, it's great to see where you guys are all coming from. And Emily, I'll let you get back to it.
Thank you. Sorry for the brief pause in activity, and loving seeing where you're all from. I don't think you missed much if anyone's just joined, other than me dropping off spectacularly mid-flow. I was just explaining that my company is called The TruthWorks, which is all about helping companies attract and engage talent authentically, and saying that it's all in the name, really. So I honestly believe that finding what's true about your company is the most compelling thing, and telling those stories in a way that is real, not overly polished or glossy, but in a way that really gives candidates a look inside your world. So that's a little bit about what I do. And I wanted to tell you my story, I guess, in two ways. So firstly, there's this way, my official biography, if you will. So when I talk about myself professionally, I often say I'm an independent employer brand strategic consultant. I'm based in Amsterdam. Hi to those of you in the Netherlands. And I'm the formal global head of employer branding at booking.com. Before that, I spent a decade in advertising and marketing on the consumer side as a strategic business director, and I was working on transforming brands like Dove and Absolute Vodka. What I think gives me a bit of an advantage from having that background and having that viewpoint is I really can help join the dots in the employer brand space. So I can understand how employer branding relates to the business ecosystem, and also find opportunities to leverage PR and consumer marketing to employer brands' advantage. So that's my professional bio, but what I like to do is tell people a little bit about who I am as a person as well, because human storytelling is what we're here to speak about today. So I'm also, as part of my life, a low-ranking servant to an 18-month-old dictator. His name is Lennox. Some of you might relate. My duties include cleaning food off the walls, reading the same book 5,000 times, and looking for the other shoe. There is always only one of them. My mum is my hero. She's a Guyanese, that's at the top of South America, for any of you who don't know, powerhouse called Monica, who's built a career for herself and a life for herself in a way that just blows me away. And I guess a little bit more about me is I've been known to fall on my face before getting up and trying again, both literally and metaphorically. Literally in the case of my friend's wedding, where I was a bridesmaid and didn't manage to stay on my feet, which the cameraman kindly captured. So why did I tell you all of that? Because I believe that when we tell stories that have authenticity, that tell stories that have the human element in there, it allows our audience to connect with us. So in telling you that second half about myself, hopefully you get a little bit of insight into what drives and motivates me. Equally, when we think about our audience, when we think about whether we're talking to leadership and trying to persuade them, or talking to candidates, or talking to our current employees, we need to think about them as people, as holistic humans that have drivers and motivators that actually exist in the world outside of work as well. People might take a job because of a family decision. They might take a job because of something that's happened in their past. So we need to think about the entirety of people that we're speaking to, which is why I tell you a little bit more about myself. So what I wanted to start with, because I'm going to be focusing on storytelling to influence and compel leadership to engage with your employer brand, I wanted to start by understanding what some of the biggest barriers you face at the moment in engaging your leadership with employer brand right now. And there are a few options for you. There are 5 options here, and Daniela's going to share a poll with you for those of you that want to take part. And I want to know if you think it's mainly, your main issue is that they're preoccupied with the bottom line, your leadership. The second is they're dealing with furloughing employees and layoffs, and it just isn't a priority. 3, they're more worried about keeping the remaining talent in your organization engaged than attracting new talent. 4, they're finding it hard to plan ahead or see beyond the immediate issues that they're facing. Or 5, they don't really know what you do as an employer branding or recruitment marketing professional and how you add value. So you'll see there is a poll in the polls tab. You can take part now and submit your vote. And I'd love to see what you're all struggling with so that I can tailor my comments to you accordingly. Great, so some results coming in. Interestingly, looks like a lot of you are talking about the fact they're finding it hard to plan ahead or see beyond the immediate. They don't really know what you do or how you add value. That's a familiar challenge that I've experienced in my career for sure. Okay, interesting that none of you have said they're dealing more with furloughing employees and layoffs. Might be because furloughing is quite a British expression, meaning putting employees on a government protection scheme or having to put them on ice for a while and before having to make decisions about letting them go. But really interesting to see these results. Okay, so some of our biggest struggles are focusing on remaining talent rather than attracting new talent, finding it hard to plan ahead or see beyond the immediate, and not really knowing what you do or how you add value. So let's bear these in mind as we go through. And if you have any more questions on those specific areas at the end that I haven't covered in this, then we'll come back to them. But great to get an understanding of what you're struggling with. Speaking of struggling, I think we have both more challenges than we'd ever faced, as evidenced by this poll in the employer branding space and engaging leadership with employer branding. But equally, I believe we've got more opportunities than ever before. No idea if this is true, any Chinese speakers shout, but allegedly when written in Chinese, the word crisis is composed of 2 characters. One represents danger and the other represents opportunity. And I think there is this double-edged sword in everything going on in the world at the moment. We have both the sort of problems that crisis creates, but also it surfaces things that were always there that actually now we have the opportunity to address and move forward and create more opportunities for ourselves and a world that we would like to see. There's a quote from Seth Godin that is quite old now that says, marketing's no longer about the stuff that you make, but about the stories that you tell. I believe the world's moved on since he said this. And actually the world, marketing of all kinds is now more about what people say about the stuff you do. So our stories are no longer our own stories. They're no longer things that we have complete control of. Social media has made that more and more evident. And I think where that was creeping into things like consumer reviews for many, many years, now it's really part of how we tell stories as an employer as well. Our employees are more empowered than ever before to tell our story for us. So how do we frame that conversation? How do we become part of that conversation? How do we get ahead of it? You will have seen so many headlines, I'm sure, across the world, but also in your own markets, where this is the case, where the stories that companies are telling are no longer being told by themselves, but actually by the people within inside their organizations. We can see it in every brand from Virgin to Adidas, to Taco Bell, to Facebook, to companies like Zimmerman and fast fashion companies. Equally, we're seeing incredibly positive stories and positive brand shifts, both from an employer brand and from a consumer brand perspective, coming through when employees decide to speak up positively about their employer. Seen with everything from Twitter to companies like Fidelity, to Instacart, and most impressively always Patagonia, who really lead the way on the stories that they tell and that their employees say about them. So I believe that all elements of your brand are deeply interrelated in the eyes of the public and your own people. So for leadership, it should never have been more important than it is now to pay attention to employer branding. So let's flip the switch. What are the biggest opportunities for engaging leadership with employer branding right now? I see lots of opportunities. I see the fact that how companies treat talent just became front page news. Employer brand just went mainstream. This has become more important than ever before, and your leaders need to sit up and take notice. Your leadership probably need more help and support than they've ever needed before, but actually everyone needs something from them. You have an opportunity to offer them support in a new way and to help solve some of their problems through your employer branding work, problems they might not have even realized could be solved by employer branding. Companies are having to spend more time looking inward as well at the problems they face internally, at challenges and issues they're seeing with employees challenging them on things. You actually have that time to look outward, to look at what their competitors are doing, to look at what your talent competitors are doing, and to bring back those insights internally. As employer brand professionals, as recruitment professionals, you have more of a finger on the pulse about how other brands are handling the crisis. You're always looking outward. You're always making those comparisons. Hopefully, if your recruiting has slowed down, that's not just a challenge, but actually could be an opportunity to have the space to think strategically about what comes next. So don't see that slowdown as a disadvantage, see it as an opportunity. Equally, you likely have a connected network across the business, whether that's through the hiring managers you've come in contact with, or because you're an employer brand professional looking for those stories within your organization. You likely have better connections across the business than many other people. So you're in this great, unique position to actually help. You thrive in ambiguity and you don't think in silos. If you're an employer branding professional, you've never been able to think that way because you've been pulled in so many different directions. And hopefully you have an ear to the ground on employee sentiment in a way that many others don't. I actually did a poll recently on my LinkedIn where I asked, if you work in a company as an employer brand professional, how has your role changed and shifted as a result of COVID-19? And actually the poll came back, so I have about 5,000 followers. I think only a few hundred people took part in this poll, but actually many people said their scope and influence are actually greater as a result. So now is the time, now is our opportunity to really get employer brand to be taken seriously. But when no one knows where we're heading, where do we even start? It's really easy to feel lost right now. It's really easy to think, I don't even know where to begin creating a strategy for employer branding, let alone starting to figure out what story we want to tell, because the world is changing so rapidly. How can you plan in these circumstances? I would say, firstly, don't wait for someone to give you a brief. Your leaders are scrambling. They're still trying to work out what comes next. Don't wait for someone to say, this is what employer branding help I need. Think about writing your own brief. And Daniela is going to provide the link to this, but I've linked to a post on my LinkedIn where I suggest briefs that employer brand professionals can write for themselves and start thinking about. In a world of unknowns, start with what you do know. There are insights that you have, there are things that you know, whether they're immediate or things that you've seen happen in the past that you predict will happen again. Start with what you know and go from there. If you don't have any insights, conduct your own research, however rough. Create your own poll internally, use your networks and leverage your community externally. LinkedIn is a great resource. There are Facebook communities for talent communities and for employer brand communities. Use those communities to crowdsource insights from others as well, and to say you've done your research that way. You don't always have to set up professional research. Develop some hypotheses and then try to back them up. Think about what you believe is true, and then find the data that backs up that insight. Read beyond EB. Think about what your leaders care about. Your leaders are thinking about the business implications. They're thinking about the...
Hey, I think Emily dropped off again. I just posted in the chat tab there we go. But you can find her link in the chat tab on how to write your own brief.
Thank you. For some reason, the software keeps kicking me out, but we're nearly there, so all good. I'll always reconnect if I lose you. Yeah, so read what your leaders are reading so that when you go to them, you can place your insights and you can place what you want to tell them in the context of what they're thinking about. Come up with a simple, actionable and modular plan. Potentially do a risk and reward analysis. If we try this, the risk is this, but if we don't do it, this is the risk. And make sure that the risk of not doing it is greater than the risk of just trying. And go beyond your silos. Stress test your plan with other people in the organization, build allyship, refine it, but stick to your gut. I just want to touch on these briefly. I'm not going to go through all of them, but when you're thinking about approaching your leadership to get them to take your employer branding ideas seriously, try to tell a connected story. So think about the problem and the opportunity. So instead of saying, I really feel we should be doing some more employer brand work, I need some budget, think about the story you want to tell them. So for example, I've noticed that our employees are becoming disengaged, and this is starting to damage both our brand and future brand because they're posting their frustrations online and on Glassdoor. This could have a long-term impact on our employer brand. So to combat that, here's what I propose. Or for another example further down, I've noticed that our communications need to be more agile than ever as the situation is evolving so fast. Our corporate, consumer and employer brand has never been so integrated, but our teams are not structured to work in real-time partnership. For example, could we experiment with a crisis coalition that could allow us to experiment with a more agile way of working in the future? Tell a story, help them understand the problem that you're trying to solve rather than just saying we should be doing more employer branding. And I've given some other examples here that we can share afterwards. And then think about how you approach the conversation. Remember what we said at the beginning, people are humans first. Think about what your leadership team is struggling with, and what they're thinking about, and try to approach them as an entire human being. So think about getting what you actually want to say up in the very request that you make to have a meeting. So what's your elevator pitch? What's your one sentence that says, I've observed this and I want to come to you with a proposal about this? Hustle for that slot. They're time poor. Can you sit down with them over lunch, buy them a sandwich, whatever the opportunity is. Explain what problem you're solving up front and why it matters, as I've explained before. Make it clear you've already done some research and you've got support from allies. Propose how you'll measure success. Maybe it's even just doing a small pilot first as a proof of concept. Know exactly what you will need from them to move forward. I will need exactly these resources, and this will be what impact I hope to have. Be clear on your next steps and any budget needs, and also show you're being frugal. Show them that you've already shared this proposal with people who have looked at your budget, you've found ways to cut corners, and you've already made savings. That always helps. And just do 10 slides max, any supporting data, and give it to them as a leave behind. Anything longer, they probably won't engage when you're thinking about leadership. So just on a final note, I wanted to leave you with this quote from Brené Brown, which is, when we make the choice to dare greatly, we sign up to get our asses kicked. We can choose courage or we can choose comfort, but we can't have both, not at the same time. Going to leadership, telling them a story about what you want to do, and having the conviction to present your ideas is scary. But if we are not relevant now as employer brand leaders, then when will we be? That's all. I'd love to, I guess we'll move on to the next presentation, and I'd love to answer some questions from you. And if you want to join me on LinkedIn, I'm here.
Also popped in Emily's LinkedIn, so you can feel free to connect with her. In the meantime, I will invite Bailey to join, and then we'll just do the Q&A after to go over all the questions. So yeah, we'll just wait for Bailey, and then in the meantime, feel free to connect with Emily on LinkedIn. Thank you so much, Emily, for your presentation. It was super insightful. I'm really excited to get to the Q&A at the end, but first, I'm also really looking forward to Bailey's presentation. So without further ado, Bailey, it's your turn to take it away.
Cool, thank you. Hi, everyone. I just want to say thanks to Emily and Daniela and the Recruity team. It's super cool to be invited to join you guys. I'm learning a lot all the time, so this is awesome. I am from real kind of startup, scale-up experience, so certainly not big business, and my passion is lies in kind of the foundation and where we sit. So it's really cool after Emily's presentation to see that we are on the right track with a lot of this. And maybe from my experience, and for those of you who are from more startup, smaller organizations, this may speak to you a bit more. But I think the principles remain, and it's good to see where we're at. So let's move on. So I'm from OfferZen, and we are based in South Africa. Our kind of home base is Cape Town, and I'm an organizational psychologist, and I, as Daniela said, I head up OD, and so we don't have a specific kind of employer brand person or focus. We a small team, and I kind of handle it. So this is really my approach, and I hope it's useful for those of you who are in small organizations. So a little bit about OfferZen and our story. I think we're brand new in Europe. We just launched in Amsterdam a couple of months ago, right at the beginning of COVID and the pandemic. So it was a really interesting space to like launch a new brand in Europe. So there's been a lot of learning. So I wanted to give you a bit of context about who we are and what our brand's about. And I think, as Emily said, using stories is certainly something to leverage, and specifically within a startup, because it's aspiring, and you want to talk about the human connection and who's actually thinking about these concepts. So our story started almost 5 years ago to the day, in fact, on a beach in California, where our co-founding brother team, Philip and Milan Nube, were camping on a beach in California and really reflecting on, they were in America to try and launch another business, and they just started to realize that there's so much potential within the world. And and how do we actually have an impact on that potential, and how do we really add value? And so we came down to this core mission that we really believe there's an incredible amount of human potential in the world, and how to unlock that dormant potential is difficult when opportunities are not equally distributed. So how do we kind of connect people to these opportunities, which only a few realize in their lifetime? So we refined this idea, and they refined this idea over time, and we came up to building a community-driven marketplace, tech marketplace. And the idea is that makers, software developers around the world unlock value for lots of people, and they're going to build software that can change the world. So how do we connect them with the opportunity to do that? And to do that, finding the perfect job allows you to unlock your potential. And so we've landed on building a marketplace. And in South Africa, we've established a huge community-driven marketplace filled with amazingly talented developers. And the reason I wanted to speak to it is because we're in an incredibly fortunate position, and I'm not sure this happens to a lot of people in terms of employer branding professionals or recruiters or people ops, because I'm in a unique position where OfferZen's value proposition and brand proposition is as relevant internally as an employer brand as it is to our community and our customers. So we basically, like how I look at employer branding is how we connect those. And we do that by thinking about how do we engage community and what principles do we have around engaging people. And so core principles of OfferZen is around building human connection. It's around being transparent and sharing. So investing in people for the long term to build these communities, these networks, these loops is part of our core, which is really useful in this space because it helps to drive our employer brand. And I think as in people ops and ODN, focusing on that, the understanding that the value comes from the people, that people who you hire, how you position yourself, how you build a business is what drives the brand. And I think this speaks to a lot of what Emily's started off with, is about being authentic and building these communities. You have to be okay to share and be transparent. And those are the principles we stand for internally. So how we drive these community networks is around understanding that the value for the community comes from the community, and building up people to drive learning and insights is what really drives these networks that multiply over time. So that investment is really cool, and we've seen that building those communities across different core, different missions, so mentoring and recruitment, as well as kind of building software, has really leveraged our brand within the market. So building the employer brand and building our brand, I think when you're a startup, it's really easy to get into the space of like, we need talent and we're going to bring in talent and what do we need to do for it? But I think fundamentally, investing in people, although it sounds pretty simple to start off with, is actually what leverages the brand and is actually quite difficult to do. And I think that it becomes quite complex. This is a Slack message from one of our senior members, one of our leaders, and I was chatting to him about employer branding, and we kind of kept coming back to this. Well, what do we have to do internally? And it's really around like being quite true to understanding that if you're going to build a great place to work, that will leverage your employer brand. And that becomes quite complex to do. And this is not something I expect you to be able to read, but I was just kind of throwing out what do some of these things look like, and if you're really going to break it down, how do we think about it? And as you can see, it just becomes quite complex. And I think for all of us in the people space, when you're dealing with how do you build connection, how do you build ambition, how do you unleash this potential, all these things become quite complex. But I think it starts with, as Emily said, it starts with building a great business. And the stages to doing that and understanding it comes with really knowing who you are. So I thought about it in practice as a startup. Where do we go to? What have we done? And I think, we didn't sit to say what was our EVP as a starting point. The starting point was like, what do we stand for? Where are we going? And who's best suited to get us there? And really understanding like, how do you create direction? So I fundamentally believe like to create a great place to work, which leverages this brand recognition, you have to create direction for the team, for the people who are driving what that brand means. So for me, and at OfferZen, the starting point for our team is, what is the vision? What is our core mission? And what is our purpose? Where are we going? So to know where you're going and who's going to get us there, those that are best suited, is something that we really focus on very deliberately. And what follows on from this is around how we're going to achieve it. So over time, and I don't think culture is just born out of principles, but if you craft what those principles are, you know where you're going, you start thinking about, how do we find the best people? How is this culture going to help us perform? And so I think really explicating, which is something we talk about a lot at OfferZen, really trying to say, what do we stand for? What is this culture we're building? And how do we make sure that that scales? Has been amazing to like organically drive brand recognition. People are able to know what we stand for, what do they want to share, and I'll take you through some of those principles in a second. But that's around knowing the culture you want to build that's going to drive to the direction. So I see it as this cascading plan, essentially. And I know one of the questions was around how do you plan? And I think it does come from, let's define our mission. Let's define where we're going. Let's think about our core principles. Let's think about what we stand for and how we're going to invest in the people for the long term that are going to drive that. And I think, going back to that kind of this elaborate maze of what we want to do to build an employer brand, when I think about it in terms of content production or marketing, the organic side of employer branding, especially in a startup scale-up world, is so important to leverage. And you do that through telling the stories within the team. And so some of the key principles at OfferZen that we stick to is around transparency, taking people along the thinking journey, being open to how we share, how we solve problems. And that comes from understanding that our growth mindset is about individual brand as well as building the organization. So I think that clear investment in people, and if you are true to that, works for you in terms of employer branding and how you become a recognized brand. So if you look at all of these as kind of a real straw man and kind of high level plan, it's really around what is our brand proposition, how are we going to achieve it, what is this culture, and then how do you attract the best talent. And fundamentally, adding value to others has a net positive effect. And so I guess it's around how do, some of the questions is what do you do to kind of practically do this? And I think around building internal content and sharing and using that organic view of how do you build traffic and interest into your brand is really important. And that comes from the people within. So using everyone as, I guess, networkers and brand ambassadors is really important. So this point at the bottom around being transparent and vulnerable and visually distinct comes into a strategy around building the brand. And I think to say at OfferZen, it hasn't been that we've been explicitly deliberate around people sharing. It's people wanting to grow their own brand. And I think as part of our culture, we drive a growth mindset. And that means people want an individual brand. It's not easy to achieve, but you have to be really focused and know that that's something that creates that brand recognition down the line. I wanted to share this. It's just a screenshot from our blog, but there's so much around OfferZen updates on our blog, and I think that speaks to our employer brand strategy and our individual growth mindset, where this is coming from team members who want to share. Our founders who want to share their stories, from people who are engaging with our community and want to share community stories. So I think when you more of a startup scale up and kicking this off, it's to think about that if you define and craft what you know to be true internally and authentically, it becomes quite a vulnerable space to say I'm going to share. But I think it's really important to know that that's deliberate. So we share a lot of how we solve problems, and that doesn't appeal to everyone. It portrays our culture, it crafts our culture, and through individual sharing and understanding this golden thread within the organization of what we really stand for, you see that our culture kind of comes out when people are sharing. And it only attracts some, and we're quite open that being high growth, having high agency in the organization, being a startup that values execution, there's a lot of people that it doesn't appeal to. But I think it comes through quite strongly in our sharing and our content. So you become quite transparent and prepared to put yourself out there with team content very openly on multiple channels. And so this is more formal, but on LinkedIn, people are sharing, they're starting their own blogs, their own pages. And I think we're really proud of the growth internally, and that we admire kind of humble and openness and vulnerability to drive that. So I think it's quite important. So I wanted to share, please go check out our blog if you want to see how we're trying to solve some of the COVID problems. And we also use our community content quite strongly. So we recently, through COVID, I guess everyone went remote, and was a huge shift to our culture. And we're now trying to see how we leverage that in terms of employer branding and attraction, and use it to our advantage. But we're using our community to learn and share together. And I'll share with you the remote report from our dev community to understand what their preferences are and how we've then carved that within our own employer brand to drive it. So it's this mutual learning and sharing constantly. And I think that's it's really helped us leverage our brand by understanding the power of community and being open and transparent about how you're doing things. And the last aspect I think that I focused on in a previous employer and here is around how do you visually represent it. And I think often people, ops and employer branding internally gets lost in a lot of noise. And so having a distinct brand, whether it's slightly differentiated from your customer facing brand or it's the same, it's around being pretty distinct and pretty visible. So OfferZen loves swag. We share it widely. You see it all over the show in South Africa, and I'm hoping it starts to spread all over Europe when we start sending our swag to everyone and have a lot more employees all over the show. So I think we play to our culture and our brand through this playful space. So yeah, that's us at OfferZen, and I think I think it's a journey, and I'm hoping that that was insightful for some. Thanks, Daniela.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Bailey, for also giving us a lot of insights on how to build a concrete employer brand through storytelling. So as I mentioned before, we got a ton of questions from our registrants prior to the online meetup that we would like to go through. We have picked out some of the ones that we thought were super relevant and super interesting. So we'll go through these first, and then we'll get to the questions in the questions tab. So our first question of the day is how to create engagement internally for staff to participate in a personal branding strategy. So Bailey, I think you touched upon this, and Emily, you also talked about this, but I guess we could also go over, how can we get everyone excited in the personal branding strategy, not just team content, but the company as a whole. I will, Bailey, go for it.
Let me take a stab. I think so there's a number, I think we drive this growth mindset, and there's a number of ways I think we help build that. Firstly, internally, without trying to leverage it, but just making, showing that investment genuinely in terms of growth within. And so we launch, we have, it's called a What the Fuck lunch. So where you actually come into the business and you can present, and it doesn't always have to be around work topics, but it's encouraging people to share learning, encouraging insights, encouraging speaking openly, putting yourself out there. So there's different internal opportunities. So posting to the blog, people volunteer all the time, being presenters internally, being quite open. We were at a lot of events and conferences previously, but now webinars, podcasts. So we include the teams in a lot of ways to kind of build up their own brand. And there's lots of opportunities for learning. So different interest groups, different opportunities to develop skills. So I think that's one way we've kind of really focused on how do you build your own brand? How do you think about how you want to grow?
I'll add a quick, I think that's a really good answer, Bailey. My quick answer would be, because I know there's so many other questions, I think generally it's not a huge challenge within most organizations to find people who are keen to improve their personal brand and who are happy to be given a platform to do so. I think everyone realizes nowadays that, you know, for their future career potential, it's great to have built that recognition for yourself internally and externally. I think the challenge is more crafting that and curating it, and how you actually make sure that anything that is created is also beneficial to the employer brand. And I think what helps is to give people some parameters to share within. So rather than just saying, for example, you know, we're looking for blog entries, think about the types of stories you're looking for, the types of stories you want to tell, or, you know, think about the creative brief you want to set people, I guess. Think about it that way. If everyone was a creator, and a lot of people can create their own content brilliantly, what would the brief be for them? And then deliver that brief in, you know, maybe a fun internal teaser of what you're hoping to get, or a fun challenge that you gamify somehow. But giving people parameters to help steer their creative output often will yield better results that are more beneficial for your employer brand.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I think both of you had really great answers. Promoting people internally from all works of the business and giving them parameters so they have something to build on if they feel a little uncomfortable, I think is a super healthy way for them to have initiative. So I'm going to get to another question that we found really interesting, especially I think it's super relevant today, is how can brands use storytelling to promote diversity and inclusion? So Emily, I think this was one of your questions you also really were excited about answering. So I will let you take the stage.
Yeah, it's something I thought about, I've been thinking about a lot recently, and that my clients have been asking me as well. I think what's what's most significant and where there is a power with storytelling is when you give people who would not normally have been given a platform to tell their story. That's an incredibly powerful responsibility. So I think we tend to focus when we think about D&I as talking about, you know, the company has a very strong D&I stance and this is what we believe in, and, you know, showing lots of employees from different ethnicities. That's actually not as powerful as just giving a platform to different voices, to voices whose stories are not being told and whose stories are inspiring. That's certainly the way I've approached it in the past, and I think there's a lot more power in that than just talking about D&I. So that would be my short answer. There's a lot more I can say on this topic, but I think that's the most important takeaway for me.
Yeah, I think that's a really powerful short answer, is to give those that would not necessarily have the power to, you know, have the network and the platform to share their stories, and, you know, to give them that encouragement and comfort that they are, you know, that they have the opportunity as well to share these stories. Just a side note, I realized that I didn't post Bailey's LinkedIn in the chat. So if you want to connect with her, her LinkedIn is there. But yeah, I think that was also a great answer, Emily. I'm not sure, Bailey, if you would also like to touch upon this.
Yeah, I think it's something which definitely, I mean, in South Africa as well, we at OfferZen in particular, we've launched our OfferZen Foundation, which focuses on building up mentor programs and how we mentee programs, and how we really within the tech community can support and add value more widely. And I think it's about telling a lot of those stories. And when you understand that the impact of diversity within your customer base and internally, what that does, it starts to help, I think, where we look at hiring and how we talk about that, because I think this idea of like bias and hiring like for like is so apparent. And in South Africa, it's something that we really have to put a lot of effort into surfacing. So I think for us, it's really about creating that awareness internally and then trying to do more across the business and using that as a platform.
And how can you also get some leadership buy-in to also use employer branding stories to, you know, create a more inclusive and diverse, like a story and brand? What are some tactics and strategies that can be used to get leaders to also, you know, realize how important this is? And that, you know, if you don't have, I see we have some questions about, there are some companies that have, you know, not the best employer brand. What is it that companies can do to, you know, not use diversity and inclusion in their storytelling, you know, just to make them seen that they are doing this, but that you can actually feel that they're doing this from a place that actually matters?
The most important thing you can do is to actually do something about D&I in your organization. That's the best story you can tell, obviously. Being incredibly humble and transparent about the areas you still have to work on, and being very clear on what the steps you are taking to work towards those goals are. That's some of the most powerful D&I storytelling at the moment. Certainly, you know, from what I've seen, I have so much more respect for companies, and we're more likely to join a company that acknowledges and is clear on the data that they have, you know, and the challenges that they've uncovered, and also being very vocal about the fact they're ready to do the work and how they are planning on doing the work. I think that's what people want to see mostly now. You know, that and giving a platform to voices that are not always heard, I think are the two most powerful things.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. And I think we're seeing it more and more on how proactively, like just having the communities and understanding the diversity within the community and the benefit of having diverse communities and what that drives in terms of adding value proactively it's coming up from the community, and organizations need to really drive it. So I couldn't agree more with him.
Yeah, I think starting with a platform and also being super transparent about where your company is, and not just saying that you're going to put in the work, but that you actually have an active plan to put in the work with this is also super important. And so we have another question that was sent in by one of our registrants that I would also like to get to before we get to the questions in the questions tab is what key questions should I ask myself before I produce content to my audience?
What does your audience care about in general? It's interesting, sort of produce content to my audience. It's interesting the use of to. I don't know if that was a slip of the tongue or that was the actual phrase, but you're producing for your audience, not delivering content to them or at them. You are ideally showing them inside a world they might potentially be interested in joining. More often than not, they're not interested before you're thinking about talking to them. They're interested, in the way that I said at the beginning of my presentation, they're interested in so many things beyond just the role at your company. So I would also look for trends about what matters to a broad audience at the moment. So, for example, things like stability have become more important. Things like flexibility have become more important. Build things that are important in the world to the type of audience you want to attract into your narrative. Don't just talk at them about what you think is interesting about you.
I realized I was, sorry.
No, I just want to say I love that because, I think what we've done to try and get ahead of change and looking at change management when we were so connected as an organization and weren't remote really, it was one day a week, and facing those changes and really getting ahead of it and being quite vocal of what we're doing has been great to kind of set up thought leadership within our communities. And even we didn't say we had it all right, but just being vocal about where we're at and what we're trying to do and what changes we were facing has indirectly attracted so many people to engage. And so that's been a really, really amazing, because admitting you don't have the answers, but this is what you're thinking inadvertently has brought so many people towards the brand.
Yeah, I think that's a really good. I think you both, nailed it on the head. What is your audience? Looking at the trends, finding their pains and then producing content that matters to them, right? How can you help them go through these obstacles that are the pains, and what can you do, to help them through it? Is a really good way to finding out what you can produce content for your audience. So I'm going to get to the questions in the questions tab now because we only have a couple of minutes. And so our first question is from Camilla. She had the most upvotes, and it was how to leverage employer branding efforts while having an increasingly bad employer reputation. So example, Glassdoor reviews, Reddit topics, and other channels we can't control.
This is a fun one. I'm happy to start if you want, Bailey, or do you have a burning response?
Oh, no, please, take it away.
So I've been here. I've been where you are. And what bothered me a lot was the contradiction between positive and authentic. They were positive, authentic stories we were putting out into the world, but the consistent negativity on employee channels. I think there's a big education job to do with your leadership on the importance of these channels. And if you can, and if you are able to track whether your audience are visiting certain channels, how much traffic you're getting to these channels, and how much impact you can predict or project or prove that they are having on your hiring, the better. A nice way to also start to track that is thinking about whether when you interview candidates, you ask them, if you want to do it just manually, whether they visited these channels, what they perceived, and also if you get rejections, to have a tracker that shows that you've got rejections as a result of the candidates have done on these channels, which if the reviews are bad enough, I guarantee you some of these candidates will be rejecting on that basis. That will all help to drive change from the inside, which really is the most important thing you have to do. But around that, of course, you have to try and mitigate. So I used to use a 4-pronged strategy, which was report, redirect, rally, and reframe. So the reporting piece was, as I'd mentioned, what can you track? What can you report back to the business? What are the trends you're consistently seeing? So that you can highlight the key areas for them to address, rather than just saying there's this huge insurmountable problem, you know, our Glassdoor is horrendous. Saying across these channels, here are the 3 key topics that keep coming up, and here are the 3 things we would prioritize addressing from the people department. That way, at least you are trying to drive change internally and address these. Redirect is about redirecting some of the rage from external channels back to the relevant internal channels. So if you have the resources, replying at least to some of the worst, to say, you know, here are people we'd love you to speak to internally, especially if they've stayed within the company and their current employees, but also just making sure internally you're being super clear on all of the internal places they have to voice their concerns before it gets to an external channel. Like, are there enough checks and balances internally, or do people feel that the Glassdoor is the only way they're going to get heard? Rally is about how you can surface some of the positive within your organization, because most of the time people will go on these channels to complain, and employees who have really positive experiences might not even have considered leaving a review. So what I definitely do not advocate for is trying to tout for positive reviews. That's not what you're looking for. But you are reminding people that whatever their experience, and when they share an experience, that you'd love them also to share it externally as well. And also thinking about key moments, you know, if they've just passed a probation and they're feeling really positive about the experience, you know, or moments where they might be feeling positive, giving them a little reminder they can also share that externally to help show others what life is really like within the walls. But remember, you're not bribing them. You're not trying to persuade them to leave a positive review. You're just saying, we'd love to hear your views, and to try and canvass a bigger variety of reviews. And then reframing is about helping empower hiring managers and recruiters, and also the people managing your Glassdoor and those channels, to reframe those challenges. So yes, some of those things are certainly true, but what are you doing about them? How are you responding to them? Because actually, it's not the problems that define us as an organization, it's how we respond to those problems and how we respond to those challenges. So having answers ready, having a plan, having concrete solutions in place, and if not, then at least empowering your recruiters to be able to answer those questions, because those are the questions they're going to get, and helping them to say, yes, you know, these are areas we're not perfect in. These are things we're flagging up to the organization. We are aware there's a problem, but here are all the other things that are great about our organization. Never lie your way through it, but just preparing them to respond. Long answer this time.
It's a very passionate answer. Bailey, I think maybe you also want to touch upon this as well.
No, I mean, I don't have Emily's experience in it, and I think that's excellent. I've taken notes. Just from an OD space, which is where I'm mostly sitting, I think there's a lot of opportunity, I guess, to see how you use that feedback loop, which often is quite difficult to just drive. You have a roadmap and there's things that you want to do and want to change, but it's quite a critical feedback loop. So I think, just as Emily said, a lot of when I have received feedback, or we've done candidate experience surveys or looked at exit interviews, like how do you drive that feedback loop and change management and reprioritize possibly in terms of your roadmap or what you were thinking, because there's often things you don't pick up depending on the size of the organization or where you're at. So I think it's really also positioning it as a possible reprioritization, or how you really use that feedback to build change management initiatives.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think you both have really good feedback for this. It's okay. How do we take this feedback? You know, as an organizational design and performance view on, we take this feedback and then we start answering it internally. And of course, as an employer branding point of view, is okay. We see the problem. We're going to address it, and we're going to let you know that we're going to be honest that we are trying to change, from an internal way. And of course, with that employer branding from internal to external, how do you take what you've gotten? How do you use this as a learning? And so we only have a few more minutes, and we'll answer one more question. I'm sorry for the rest of you. I'll make a note of the questions, and I'll ask the speakers. We'll try to get those answered for you. So the next question that we have is from Andrea, and her question is, how do we still keep the company on top of mind next to candidates, even though we have stopped hiring and have nothing to give them? We have been creating a lot of content, but we notice it leads to a dead end since we have no call to action, no clear journey from awareness, consideration, and decision.
I think all what I can add to this is I think it comes back to how you kind of engage and leverage this community and shared learning. So you've got no call to action, and there's you're not hiring at the moment, but there's a lot of sharing. There's a lot of challenges we're all facing. So how do you bring people in and add value to them by sharing what you're doing or what you're thinking? And I think it I guess keeps them warm, your warm lead, but at the same time, you're actually adding value both ways and giving and getting feedback. So I think some of these key engagement strategies when building community, not because you want to get something back, because you want to give, and that if you can do that authentically, I think people keep following, keep engaging for when the time is right. They still want to see what you're doing, and so it's about giving, I think, and sharing. And awareness of where people are at right now.
I think that's a great answer. I'm not going to have much to build on that, only that, it's very commendable you are continuing to engage with this community and not just dropping off a cliff with them. So keep doing it, because it is worth it for all the reasons just mentioned. I would just say, if you already have a community, why not ask them? This is a two-way conversation. Why not ask them what would be useful and say, look, transparently, we don't have any roles at the moment. We'll be updating this fantastic community as soon as we do. But in the meantime, what would you like to hear from us? What can we share with you that would be of value to you? Why not? What have you got to lose?
Thank you so much. I'm sorry, but I don't think we have time for one more question. But I do want to just drop into the chat tab, our Facebook group. We will be sharing the survey and some other resources there. And so join the Facebook group. We're happy to build this community, use it as a way to engage with the community as well. I do have one last poll going out that I would just like to see. So basically, quickly, I would just like to see, what would you like to specifically learn when it comes to digitizing your employer brand? Would you like to learn how to optimize social media? How company culture is changing in a digital world? How do you pimp out your careers page, right? Your career sites, and also how videos optimize employer branding. So we'd love to get some of your feedback. I also just want to thank Bailey and Emily so much, these wonderful ladies, for joining us today. It was super insightful. You both had so many inspiring, so much inspiring wisdom to give, and I really hope the TA Innovators community also found this super inspiring, engaging. So we will have some online meetups coming up. And great to see that you guys are also tuning into the polls tab. So thank you so much for joining us today. And once again, thank you, Emily and Bailey, for joining. Of course, we could not have done this without both of you. So
thank
you so much. And we'll see you at the next TA Innovators online meetup. Hopefully.
you.
Bye.
Thanks for having us. Bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone.